G'day. Welcome to Lunch Money. You are live with your social media and online home for special situations, workouts and capital raising professionals. My name is Nick Samios. I am the fund manager and director here at Hermes Capital, and I'm your Lunch Money host. So a very warm welcome to you. Today we're going to talk about credit risk. Credit risk from a trade credit point of view. In other words, from a supplier's point of view. Those people who supply credit for goods, typically on a business-to-business basis, but sometimes on a consumer basis as well. And there's a lot of people, there's a whole industry, a whole profession, I should say, out there of people who are making decisions day to day as to how much credit to extend to people who are buying on credit and how to manage that credit. And it's obviously been a very hot area in the last 12 months. So that's what we're going to talk about today with two very special guests who will help us step through that. In fact, I'm going to talk about the Australian Institute of Credit Managers risk report for 2021. And I saw that on LinkedIn, and that's what sort of alerted me that maybe that's something we should talk about here on Lunch Money. Before we get into that, I would like to remind you to share, like, or subscribe to our humble podcast and live stream. It helps to spread the word, get the message out there that we've got. This is the online and social media home. So let's bring them all home. The other thing I would like to do is to remind anyone who's watching live that if you ask a live question or make an interesting live point, we will send you out one of these Lunch Money mugs. I normally have one to sort of flash, but we sent out our last one last week. So there's a new fresh batch on order. So I would invite you to participate if there's something you'd like to ask of one of our guests. So without further ado, I will introduce our first guest today is Nicholas Pilavidis. G'day, Nick. How are you?
I'm great, Nick. Yourself?
Fantastic. Now, Nick is the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Institute of Credit Management. He's been in that role for nearly 7 years now. The AICM itself has been around for a long, long time. I've certainly known of it for as long as I've been in credit, which has been a long time. And Nick has got a deep experience as an actual credit manager. So you've actually done the job and been there at the coalface in industry. So what is it that's been keeping you busy lately, Nick?
Yeah, it definitely has been a busy week. Looking forward to the end of it. Like most week, it's been very varied as a relatively small organisation across a few different things, but it's been great to be out with industry, with different industry bodies, with the government and regulators, representing our members on what they're seeing, and lots of great conversations with our members and credit professionals generally about what they're seeing and how things are playing out. Like most organisations coming into the end of financial year, the number crunching and budgets has also chewed up some late night hours.
And I guess so. The role of your association is to help people that are credit managers, help them with their professionalisation, getting credentials, that sort of thing, and also, I guess, keeping them current with what's going on, legislative changes, and all that sort of stuff.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, we're across all that. So yeah, we're for the individual, the credit professional that's working for a credit provider or any of the aligned industries to that. And we do a range of things from industry publications. We're currently working on a hardship report in the consumer space. As you mentioned, our risk report recently. We've got magazines, newsletters, those sorts of things that go out regularly. Big into awards. We got a Young Credit Professional Award. That's how I got involved with the AICM when I was a young credit professional. Lots of activities, events. We've got our Women in Credit events coming up around the country at the moment as well, which are a great way to rejuvenate and connect with the industry as well.
And your membership would be mainly, literally, industry credit managers. I mean, what's the sort of breakdown of your members? Literally, they're the people that are making those credit decisions day to day and chasing late payments and all that sort of stuff. Exactly.
Yeah, we say we represent the coalface of the credit industry. Those people that are making the calls, they're making credit decisions to accept credit. So they're doing the assessment of the risk of entities. They're managing the account all the way through, managing that credit risk, chasing up payments as they start to become delinquent, managing hardship processes in the consumer space, through to the enforcement and harder collection into the debt collection. And we have a great membership in insolvency and all those related fields as well, across all different industries as well. Anything where there's something sold on extended payment times, whether it's services or supplies, we've got members in it.
And I guess that as the years have gone by in recent years, as I think I was saying earlier, I was involved I was a member of the AICM a number of years ago. But since I was involved, there is a lot of legislation that can be, your credit managers can get themselves into hot water, I suppose, which is, obviously one of the reasons they want to get accredited is because, they're professional and they're proud of what they do and all the rest of it. But they also genuinely need that knowledge to do their jobs better, but also to stay out of a bit of hot water, I'd imagine.
Yeah, definitely. It's there's a lot of knowledge needed from legal, as you mentioned, insolvency, general business, technology is a big part of it these days. Obviously, managing teams, so it's a very diverse skill set required to excel at it, and we try and help members in all those different areas. It's quite unrecognised, but maybe it's been recognised a lot more over the last 12 months as cash flow has been never more important as the pandemic rolled out. And it's not until you point out to businesses that their largest asset of their business is likely to be their accounts receivable, and who have you got managing that? Oh yeah, that person is quite important. And with reputation as well, that's become even more important in the consumer and small business space.
Yeah, well, actually hold that thought, because that's something I wanted to talk a little bit about. I mean, you're right, that credit manager is responsible for so many different things. It's one thing about who do we extend credit to and how much, but it is the source of cash flow in the business. I mean, getting those receivables in is where the payroll is coming from. But as you say, they're also managing those relationships. It's always a balance. Between how hard do you push to get the money back before you lose a customer, sort of thing. All right, well, let's hold that thought. We'll just introduce our other guest, and I'll put you back into the waiting room, Nick. And Andrew Spring from Jirsch Sutherland. How are you?
Very good, Nick. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you. Very good. Now, Andrew, you are a partner and restructuring expert with Jirsch Sutherland. You're here in Sydney. You've been there for plenty of years. What is it that keeps you busy this week?
Well, I mean, as you know, at Jirsch Sutherland, we sort of focus predominantly on sort of insolvency and restructure work. So the weeks are always varied and interesting depending on sort of who needs our help at that time. So over the course of this week, I've had a sort of upskilling in some new renewable energy type businesses, whereby it's a conversion of plastics to fuel. I didn't necessarily do very well at chemistry, so that was a bit hard to get my head around. But that was interesting. I've had
So just dwell on that for a minute. So just what does the business do?
So it basically takes sort of end-of-life plastics and then converts them into a roadworthy fuel product that you can put into your car or truck.
And they've gone into administration, or?
Yeah. So they've gone into administration, subsequently been wound up actually off the back of a petitioning creditor application. But yeah, it's an interesting business or an interesting concept. That's likely to see a little bit more life as sort of someone picks it up and moves forward with it.
Yeah. So there's a bit of IP there?
Certainly, yeah. The IP around the process itself is patented. So that's something that will obviously survive, notwithstanding what happens to the company itself.
Okay. Oh, well, maybe someone watching this will give you a call and try and bid up the price of that IP for you. And tell me, what I'm speaking to some of your colleagues, it does seem to me that they are seeing a little bit more work now. But just as you've just said, it's not restructuring so much as the things going into administration and getting wound up. There's not a lot of them, but what there is that a trend that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I think sort of the important thing to remember always with formal insolvency appointments is that as a general rule, it's off the back of some sort of external pressure being applied. So, over the course of the last 15 to 18 months, there's been a real pull away from a community perspective around asserting that pressure. And we are seeing that, with the forbearance measures that governments have put in place, having lifted now, there is the opportunity for the credit community to apply a little bit more pressure if they feel that that's what's required. And so that will naturally then drive more conversations with us. But we're still a long way away from perhaps, I guess, a normal or a pre-COVID normal playing field in terms of how banks, landlords, statutory creditors, and trade creditors are behaving, and certainly the business community itself. We still have the effects of the stimulus measures that have been put in place, sitting in businesses' bank accounts or balance sheets. So it's starting to move back towards where we'd expect it, but certainly not nowhere near the levels that we'd seen before COVID hit.
Yeah, I think that certainly you talk about the cash sitting in the bank accounts. That's certainly one issue. I mean, we're starting to see people are beginning to talk to us, and clearly it's because things were fine during the COVID and when they had all the support, but things are changing. But on the other hand, I guess it's a tendency for people like you and me, Andrew, that we always sort of look for the glass to be half empty because, restructuring and all that sort of stuff is what we're involved in. But, you pick up the papers every day and the economy's booming. Inflation's going to be a problem if things continue the way they are. The printing presses are still running. So maybe, you and I should just go on extended leave.
Yeah, well, I did say to my wife at the start, before the stimulus measures were announced, I'll see you in 3 years, because I expected, like I think we all did, there to be a bit of a bloodbath. And certainly the government reactions have been really good in terms of trying to stave that off. It's likely that the sabbatical that we've been experiencing in a lot of ways is going to come to an end at some point. But I don't think we'll see sort of the levels that were initially predicted, and that's a credit to the decision makers. But at some point in time, there's no doubt that with insolvency numbers being low, new businesses being created. I think one of the stats was 4 to 1 new businesses being created to that being closed. We're not in an environment where people have suddenly become better at running their business, or it's become easier, should I say. So it's likely that all of those really challenging elements that go into running businesses are going to create some sort of impact on a number of businesses, and we'll see insolvency numbers go up.
All right. Well, look, we might just bring Nick back at this point in time. We've got a slide number 7, the one that's called corporate defaults. Can we just throw that up for a minute? And I just wanted to pick up on what Andrew was just saying about, where we're at in the cycle, really. And I just want to flash back this. Now, this comes from the AICM risk report that you've just put out, Nick. And I guess this is a story that shows the lag with the GFC. The GFC really was around 2008 is when it started. I think the bank that went under in about June-ish. But you can see that there was a lag between that happening and the insolvencies happening. So is that sort of what you're talking about a little bit, Andrew?
100%, yes. I think what you're seeing here, and it's also the tail that this slide doesn't really show, but the increased insolvency numbers post GFC sort of continued for about 2 to 3 years afterwards as well. So there is that. I think that just, if you think about it logically, it kind of makes sense in that an impact or an extraordinary event occurs. We then go through the entire process of how to deal with that, work to try and pivot or change our structure or do whatever we can to survive. So there's that hold on mentality. And then ultimately it takes a bit of time before the pinch comes and ultimately have to make a call on either a formal appointment or some form of restructure.
Well, I think also there's that hollow log effect where you mentioned before, for example, this time around it's the JobKeeper and all the money that's gone into the bank accounts. And I'm sure there was something similar back when the GFC hit. There is a lag because there's slack in the system that gets used up. Now, Nick, I'm just having a look at your LinkedIn profile, and I'm trying to work out in about 2008, you were credit manager at Ricoh. So I'm really curious we talk to a lot of accountants and insolvency and finance people here, but I'm really curious from the trade point of view. And what was that like? You were the credit manager at Rico. What was that like when the GFC hit?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I remember it quite clearly because I think I got promoted to National Credit Manager the week or the month of the Lehman Brothers collapse and the GFC really taking off. So great conditions before that, low insolvencies, low risk, and I take over and insolvency spike. Not the best induction to being a National Credit Manager, but yeah, definitely we saw that period there. And there were some other reforms around the same time with the ATO taking actions. And what we saw as that moved on was that, and it continued right up to GFC, is that insolvent businesses will be trading along as normal and then they'd wind up and close down. And that's because directors were very cautious to shut down if they're trading insolvent, and they moved through and the ATO were taking their actions. And that what we're seeing now is the reverse of that. But we know there's some risk out there that all the debts have been paid down on our members' ledgers. They've generally got the best ledgers they've ever had, but we know the risk is out there. So we keep predicting a tsunami, as everyone's been saying, but is that going to come through? Have all the bad debts been paid through, and businesses that are closed down have paid down and they just haven't gone through insolvency? They're the sorts of things our members are working through at the moment.
Now that's very interesting you say that. So it's not just me. I mean, what you just said was that their ledgers are looking very healthy at the moment. Now, when all this started, early last year, in here we all thought, my goodness, all our receivables are going to suddenly come to a stop. But as a matter of fact, touch wood, our chargebacks, or charging back at 90 days, are at record lows. So that you're saying that's kind of an experience across the board, your end as well.
Yeah, definitely. As I went around this year to see our members, the first time getting back out to see them face to face around the country, I was cautiously saying that people are telling me that their ledgers are better than ever. Tell me if it's not, because I assume there'll be some with all our members in the diverse range of industries that hadn't had that experience. But across the board, reports of days outstanding, not having any accounts above 60 days, which they've never had that sort of situation before. Most of them have got some lines that aren't moving, that are just delinquent. They don't see any reason to push for it, and even now they can. So they're just waiting for those to wind up. But yeah, record lows, sort of pinching themselves, but everyone's really worried about what's coming around the corner.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's interesting. It's like, you're probably like me. You're sort of at the barbecue on the weekend, and you're sort of a little bit. I'm really cautious, and all your other friends are like, "Well, what are you talking about? Everything, the economy's booming, the stock market's booming." You've got another there, slide number 8, which I think Creditor Watch had put in your report. Would pertain to that. Now, Andrew, this is, I'm sort of putting on a little bit on the spot here, but if you look at that graph, it's got number of days payment overdue by industry. And Nick was saying earlier that some of them that you would expect to have blown out haven't blown out, hospitality, for example. But on the other hand, construction definitely seems to have slowed down. Wholesale trade seems to have slowed down. Mining, no surprises there. Mining's business as usual. Anything in those stats there that sort of jump out at you, Andrew?
Yeah, I found that really surprising, but then I guess just sort of briefly turning my mind to it, I think that this may well be a really useful reflection of what it is that's happening in terms of this behavioural shift. So if we think about the industries that have blown out, they're the ones that have been least impacted by trading restrictions and probably been busiest through this time. So if they're utilising essentially trade credit as a means of being able to manage their growth or their increased demand, then that may well be a good reflection of what business attitude is like from a trade credit perspective. And those businesses that you would otherwise have expected to have blown out days may well have been accessing stimulus. In my experience, directors of corporate debtors are generally pretty keen to pay their trade credit, because that's mostly their supply chain. So it may well be that by virtue of having, I guess, less demand, they want to keep their their suppliers happy because of the fact that when it dials back on, they're going to need their support.
Okay. Anything? Okay. Well, that's some interesting points of view there. Nick, anything that you'd sort of add to that on that chart?
I think it points to where the pressures are being felt. It's not so much because of the pandemic, it's more because of other factors, and I guess it's pandemic induced. And a lot of the concern is with our members where they're worried about their customers' viability and their customers' viability going through, and the supply chain risk is the big one. And you look in construction, and maybe that's a lot of the payment time pressures there, that if they can't get the widgets in to finish the construction, and the progress payments are slowed up, and that slows up the whole chain. So the supply chain and other sort of systematic risks are probably where the insolvencies and credit risk is going to come from.
Yeah, one thing that I'm really interested in is when the supply chain does come back, because there are obviously issues with supply chain. Everything's clogged up ports around the world for various reasons. But there's one theory that when that comes back online, that the demand may have dropped away. But I'm just interested. There is an ancient, well, a biblical contest, Nick, a biblical contest of credit versus sales. And I once gave this slide presentation to an AICM day about 15 years ago. On the first day, God created salespeople, and on the second day, He created credit managers to clean up the mess. Would that be a sentiment that's still largely felt by your membership?
I'll be lying if I didn't say yes. That's a right sentiment. I think we were talking before about the value of credit managers, and that they're looking after the biggest assets of the business. They also have the biggest insight to the mess, I guess, that happens within a business, and whether it's sales or logistics or products. You mentioned I worked at Ricoh photocopiers for a long time. One of the things I was able to diagnose as a credit manager was a fault in a machine, because I could see that these customers are all complaining about a certain machine, a certain problem with the machine, and that was fed back to tech support, and they were able to diagnose the real cause of it. So credit sees all the problems, because if there's a problem, there's a non-payment, and that's credit department's problem.
Yeah, well, that's very true. I mean, I know in our experience as well. I mean, we see receivables, and we have a saying. I mean, it's not my saying; it's a saying in our industry that people either don't pay because they can't pay, or they won't pay. And the won't pay is, like you say, if there's something wrong with the machine. You know yourself, if you order something and it arrives, at the restaurant, it's not what you ordered, you're not going to pay for it. So I mean, who's in the ascendancy at the moment? I mean, is it credit or sales? Because a year ago, you would have thought the credit managers were in the ascendancy, because everyone would have been worried about what's happening. But now there is no doubt that parts of the economy are very hot. And I just wonder if sales would just be there going, well, look, nothing bad's happened in the last 12 months. You credit guys need to take a back seat.
Yeah, definitely they're in the front seat and the boardroom seat as the pandemic kicked off. Some credit managers that hardly spoke to the CFO or board about credit risk were having weekly and daily meetings as they're assessing those sorts of impacts. And that stayed very much the case throughout it, because we're all concerned about that risk. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, and what credit managers deal well with is that uncertainty. So definitely still very front of mind. But yeah, there has been a shift, so now we need to get those sales happening. If businesses had dropped sales, those sales need to be caught up, and there's still that risk there. So yeah, that's something we see as a big challenge coming forward, how we support the business to make sales. There's no point in credit preventing sales, because we won't get paid. No one will get paid if there aren't sales, but equally people won't get paid if the sales aren't paid for. So that tension, that relationship's more important than ever.
Okay. Now, Andrew, in that report, in the risk report, the AICM's risk report, you had an article. We'll just flash up the article there, and it was called "How to Bring Clients Back to the Future." So I'm just curious about a couple of things in that article. Firstly, you talk about bringing people back to business as usual. So I guess you've been talking a little bit about behaviour so far, this afternoon as we've been talking. I mean, what do you mean about getting customers back to business as usual? And what do you think the challenges are?
Yeah, I think the idea around bringing them back to the future, which is probably spawned off the fact that I'm trying to introduce some of my children to some of the old movies that I enjoyed when I was younger. But in any event, the concept is really about understanding that the core behaviours that exist between a creditor and a debtor have been sort of upset, I suppose, over the course of the last 15 months. The goalposts were moved. The stat demand period was extended out to 6 months, and the threshold was increased. There was lots of different ways that people were able to defer their obligations, and that for the right reasons was done, but ultimately can't remain that way forever. So it was really around the idea around that piece was really about how to then slowly, with engaging through that relationship, bring it back to a more normalised position, so that you're starting to deal with the uncertainty and help manage that risk, the debt at risk.
So maybe the metaphorical cracky dacks have got to come off, and the work pants have got to go back on, I suppose, is what you're saying. It's we're not there anymore.
Yeah, in a lot of ways that's right. Although maybe this is the challenge, is that some of the things that have come out of the last 12 months, including what we're doing right now, are really valuable for businesses. And I think, just touching on what Nick was saying, that he was hearing from some of his members about being front and center in the boardroom, is actually not a bad thing to maintain, if at all possible, whereby that real communication piece between the various elements within the business, whether it be sales, credit, or other, is a focus going forward. And maybe using the technology to do that is something that people are going to be able to use. So I think not all the behaviours that have changed are ones that need to go back. But certainly what I think is important here is that, obviously debtors can't rely on continued forbearance. Creditors can't rely on debtors, having essentially free money given to them, which is propping up their ability to pay. So the fundamentals of assessing your credit risk and the trade credit relationships that exist in your business need to come back. And I think the starting point there is just about effective communication, and whether that be inside your business or with your, to assess how it is your salespeople are going about finding that new top-up sales, or whether it's how you're dealing with the customers once they're onboarded. It's a fundamental that everybody was dealing with pre-COVID, and that needs to come back, I think.
Yeah, I guess it is a fundamental. As I was saying a little bit earlier before we sort of went live, that there is a balance for the credit manager. On one hand, it's their job to make sure that the debts are collected and people are paying on time and all that sort of stuff, because it is the cash flow of the business, and that's where payroll's coming from. On the other hand, of course, I'm sure that you see the salesperson walks in and says, "Oh, you lost my customer because you upset them when you rang them up to chase a bill." But I've always said it's if you're not paying, if you're paying too far behind terms, then they're not a good customer in any case. Look, I just wanted to segue onto consumer credit, maybe a bit of a tie with the idea of relationships and consumer credit. I came across an interesting article this week about orthodontists, and it was the Orthodontists Association, or whatever it is for orthodontists, were communicating with their membership, saying that they've got to coach and educate, and this is the sub-point that you're making, Andrew, about education and behaviours, educate to get paid and put in systems for getting paid, because little Susie or little Billy's in the chair getting their mouth wired up, or whatever it is that orthodontists do, and then there's this relationship breakdown, and Mum says, "Well, I'm not paying for Susie's teeth," and Dad says, "Well, I'm not paying for Susie's teeth," and it does go to highlight. Every industry is different, and every industry must have special challenges. But I guess that's a bit of a consumer issue there. And I'm not really in consumer world, but Nick, you do get across consumer credit issues a lot.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that we're doing a lot more work on, and I think that all ties in really well. That we're talking about communication, and it's very important for credit professionals and orthodontists that have credit risk to have clear communication with their customers, but also process and procedure. And that situation is not unique to orthodontists. We've done similar training in healthcare and in schools, obviously private and those sorts of schools where that sort of issue will obviously arise as well. And it comes down to the fundamentals of credit to get clear contracts and agreements and everything clear up front. So when something does break down, there's something to rely on, some clarity as to whose roles are what. But yeah, in the consumer space and also the SME space is a big focus for our members as well. We've seen a lot of change in that area with all the stimulus that's gone through. A lot of consumers have been able to pay down their debts as well, and that's a great thing. That we know that debt and financial concerns have a direct link to mental health. So while it's not great, super balances have been withdrawn. If they have been used to take that mental toll and stress off individuals, that's going to have a great outcome in the future. And what we have seen is where hardship and financial issues for consumers have arisen, there's a lot higher prevalence of vulnerability and hardship and mental health issues driving that. So that's very much evident, and we see that very clearly in the consumer space, and something that's really growing of prevalence in the small business space as well, because those small businesses aren't just businesses, they're people. And it's easy for the small business owner to keep that personal aspect hidden, and for credit professionals to deal with them just on a commercial basis without recognising the mental health impacts of a business having cash flow issues and financial concerns. So that's a big area for us to support our members in that, because they're interacting with these vulnerable people at a very hard point in their life, and it's just about money for us, but we're dealing with that toll as well, so supporting them through that. So the consumers and the individuals on the other side have the best possible outcome through it as well.
Yeah. Okay. And of course that whole, as soon as you're talking about consumer finance, you're talking about regulation and a whole lot of extra legal headaches potentially as well. Andrew, I noticed, we've been talking a little bit about healthcare, and on that one of those earlier slides where we're looking at the industries, healthcare was one of those areas where days have blown out. Do you come across much in the healthcare sector in your travels in insolvency?
Yeah, well, it's not sort of the the primary source of work, although I was involved in sort of a trading sale of some dentist clinics through last year, and that was sort of more driven by disputes at shareholder level, and I suspect that you might probably see more of that type of involvement from our perspective, where it's just the partners have sort of had a falling out or can't work together anymore. But yeah, the healthcare space is generally not an area that we see a lot of work in.
Getting back to Nick's point about the mental health issues, I suppose that happen. I've seen a couple of matters lately where it's one partner, the partnerships are falling apart. It's one business owner trying to take control for whatever reason. I guess I don't know. I suppose as the JobKeeper wears off and all the support mechanisms fall away, and they're back to a two-wheel bicycle, that the relationships start to get a little bit frayed. All right. Well, look, we are running out of time a little bit, so I might ask you first, Nick, for sort of any closing thoughts on where we are in terms of the business cycle, and the sort of special challenges that you think your members are facing, and we'll just sort of close on those thoughts for you.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting environment. We're looking at our conference in October, and the theme there is bringing clarity from uncertainty, and I think that's definitely what we've got at the moment. We've seen a lot of change, that relying on historical financial information has never been great, and it's becoming more and more irrelevant as the dynamic and the changes have flowed through. The great growth environment that we're seeing at the moment, how long can that continue, and what pressures are that creating? It all lines up for our members to be a great time for them to prove their worth within their business, that they continue to be under pressure and challenged, but managing cash flow has never been more important. And probably the silver lining that I see on this is our members have been really able to dig into their processes, and if there's something that hasn't been working, that was brought to light this time last year as all the stresses were being felt. So business is now in a position to invest in that, focus on that improvement so that they can weather any other storms that come through, because I'm not sure if we have further storms like this, how much more the government can prop it all up. So hopefully we all learn from that and make sure we are building that base, that strong structure to be able to weather any further storms.
Well, I guess it's interesting that you said there about looking at financials, and the trouble is that the financial data from the 2021 financial year is not, it's going to be a bit out of place, isn't it? Where it's not like you're going to be able to normally analyse it in the context that you normally would year to year. So I guess there's a whole range of extra skills that your members need to bring to the table. Andrew, any sort of closing thoughts your end?
Yeah, for sure. Look, we're still in a very an environment with a lot of uncertainty. So I guess touching on a couple of points that we've mentioned. One is beware that lag, i.e. that there is going to be an increase in insolvencies. I think there's something like 2.8 million businesses in the country. It doesn't take, if we had 5,000 insolvency appointments last year, it's not a big percentage increase. So whilst it feels like everything's peachy for a lot, if it's only 1 or 0.5% of businesses that are struggling, that's 99% are doing well, and they might be the hidden ones that you get caught with. And I think that goes a long way to what also Nick was saying about the mental health element. When I spoke at the AICM's insolvency seminar, one of the things that came through pretty loud and clear from the members was that they want to engage with their customers with empathy. And I think that's a great lesson that we can take out of this period, is that we've sort of all been in it together. We've all had to deal with lockdowns. We've all had to deal with trading restrictions, and that empathetic approach is something that we can use to overlay that effective communication piece I was talking about earlier. And I think the sort of last comment I'd probably make is that you've got to take action. So whether it be as part of the credit assessment process, the ongoing risk assessment process, or in dealing with your customers, it's about taking action at the appropriate times, picking up the phone, understanding their business, and then working with them and all the other stakeholders. And if that happens to be an insolvency practitioner, then working with them to achieve an outcome that is the best one that's available for both the people and the business. It is about dollars, but it's also about people.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. As a matter of fact, I did notice a bit of a theme through that risk report of getting to know your customer, and not only knowing your customer, but your customer's customers. So I think that might have sort of been something that you touched on in your article in that piece as well. All right, well, some great advice and some great insights. So thank you, Andrew Spring and Nick Pilavidis, for joining us here on Lunch Money today. It's been fantastic. Very grateful for you coming along today. Thank you to everybody who's watched us live, and thank you to everybody who's listening to us later on the podcast. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe, and we'll do it all again soon. Cheers.